Thank you to our panelists. I'm going to jumpstart the questioning with a few of my own. Probably the first, most important, the ones that I think most of you want to know the answer to, the most profound, is to Professor Patterson. How many fish did you catch in Canada?
How many fish did you catch in Canada?
Some big ones.
Big ones, huh? Okay. This is to all the panelists. The title of Professor Patterson's book is Freedom is Not Enough. And Professor Brooks talked about the 350 years of cheating and by whites, and then the black poker player says, well, you know, okay, you've said that there's going to be no more cheating. What are you going to do with all the chips now? We are now, after Executive Order 11246, Weber, Bakke, Grutter, 40 years into affirmative action, for example. Yet, as I believe it was Professor Brooks made mention of the fact that the National Education for Educational Progress scores, maybe it was Mr. Raspberry, I'm starting to lose track, scores are now starting to expand. That is, the disparities between blacks and whites, while stabilizing for a moment, are now expanding so that 90% of black 17-year-olds have the reading skills of the average white 8th grader. And the average black 17-year-old has the academic proficiency of the average white 8th grader. If, in fact, freedom is not enough, what is the prescription? Is affirmative action the prescription? What is it that you would do to, as LBJ said, get blacks and other minorities up to the starting line along with whites and academically Asians? Start with Professor Brooks.
Well, that's the question. I think that it's some combination of internal and external factors. I think that that's how you have to approach it. I don't think African Americans can do this ourselves. And I don't think that African Americans can rely on government to do it. It has to be a joint project. Professor Patterson talked about the Harlem Children's Zone and the KIPP Academies. I write about that in my book. I mean, that's wonderful what's happening there. But the Harlem's Children's Zone is really sort of like a total family makeover. I mean, they start from preschool all the way up through high school, and there's a tremendous amount of internal pressure put on parents in the program to toe the line. And maybe that is what needs to be done. There is one theory, the limited separatists, who believe that that's the only way you can resolve this, that African Americans have the primary responsibility and, if not the resources, to do this. So it's some combination of the two, and I would like to see more experiments like the Harlem's Children's Zone and KIPP Academies, as well as other experimentations.
Roger?
Well, let me begin by saying that I don't like the poker game analogy.
Why?
And let me explain why. And actually, I think my memory may be wrong, but I think that our keynote speaker, Mr. Raspberry, wrote a column one time where, and I've seen this analogy used more commonly, where it's not poker players, it's football teams. And you know, one football team has been cheating the whole first half and then announces at the beginning of the second half that they're not going to, to cheat anymore, and is that really enough? If I were an academic, I would characterize this as an instance of racial anthropomorphism. Does that sound pretty academic?
Me, yes,
in other words, it makes the mistake of thinking that racial groups are individuals. They're not individuals. They're made up of individuals, but they're not individuals. The people who are playing poker now are not the people who were cheated, a long time ago. They happen to share their skin color, but they're different people. They're different individuals. Now, that doesn't mean that the playing field is even now. It's not. The playing field is not level. But there are people of all colors at both ends of the playing field. You have some African Americans who, maybe their ancestors were not cheated because they didn't come over until after slavery, or they were never slaves, or whatever. And of course you have, more poor white people in the United States than you have poor black people. So the the point I'm making is that when we talk about social programs, and liberals and conservatives can argue about what programs are going to work. I think it's a mistake to focus on race and have the programs be race tested, rather than means tested. As has been pointed out, there are plenty of white kids now, in addition to Hispanic kids and Asian kids, who are caught up in this tangle of pathology that Daniel Patrick Moynihan identified. And so if we're going to have social programs, I think that they should be available to children of all racial and ethnic backgrounds. And conversely, if you are well off, even if you are African American, these programs should not be something that you automatically qualify for just because you happen to have a particular skin color.
Professor Patterson?
Well, I guess I already suggested that, well, the Harlem Children's Zone idea and KIPP schools and so forth seem to have pretty good results. In fact, they not only deal with preschool children, they also try to help pregnant mothers understand some of the problems of motherhood, which any of you have had know are many and complicated. So it really really does involve a huge intervention into the lives of these families, and some of them resent it. As to what government can do, Moynihan's ideas, for instance, of a children allowance has no political prospects. It never has in the United States. Many people think that a program such as that would simply encourage people to have more babies, which in fact was the rationale for it in some countries, such as Hitler's Germany. But you can see why people wouldn't want to give, I agree, you want to have a universalistic program which doesn't favor one group over another, but it's very hard to design any program that's available to anybody that doesn't benefit the rich more than the poor, or vice versa. Yeah. So as far as large-scale WPA works projects or employment, that too has rather dim prospects politically. Some of the money in the stimulus program has gone for this on a relatively small scale, but the WPA actually didn't have a great reputation, even though it was a pretty good program. And many people regard government work as make work. It is very expensive. It's much more expensive than welfare, for instance. So welfare, you just send a check. To provide work involves a whole lot of things: planning, engineering, selecting who gets what. And this has really not had a lot of political prospects. Also, it's been pointed out by a lot of people that the unemployment problem of blacks is not necessarily one of the non-availability of jobs. I hate to say this, but this has been pointed out by a number of social scientists that many of them will not simply take jobs because they don't think they're good enough jobs. So I don't see the government again being able to do anything about people having babies. And so this brings you back to self-help, self-improvement, but this is very hard also, as the inexorable trends, the inexorable numbers over time have shown. To tell people to shape up and not have babies, try it. Thank you.
Excuse me. Can I respond to
Sure,
Roger, because I want to defend my allegory. And I also want to suggest that the problem is not just with poor blacks, but it's also with blacks at other socioeconomic levels. For example, one of the statistics that I gave you was that middle-class black men with college degrees are earning $20,000 a year less than their white counterparts. That's a problem. And we talk about this in terms of groups rather than individuals, well, because discrimination was not just against individuals, but against groups. Nobody would stop to ask me about myself. Nobody cared about who I was individually. They cared that I was black, and that I am black. And we talk about the problem in a systemic way because that's how it is presented. The statistics are done that way as well. But the allegory talks about cheating. If slavery and Jim Crow wasn't cheating, I don't know what you call it.
I didn't say it wasn't cheating.
Well, then I don't know what the problem is with the allegory because the allegory doesn't necessarily suggest affirmative action or racial preferences or anything. It's just describing the situation, describing the problem, and then it raises the question, what do we do about the problem? What are the considerations do we take into account in order to resolve the problem?
Well, I think implicit in the analogy, and maybe I'm overreading it. I mean, at some point, of course, all analogies break down, but I think implicit in the analogy is that, well, gee, this white guy should give some of his chips to the black guy. And the reason that I'm saying I think that's where the analogy breaks down, because the white guy is not that has the chips now did not necessarily cheat in order to get them. Well, and the black guy who is getting the chips, may not have chips because he was cheated. I just think, and conversely, I think that the you can't really design a program, Professor, I don't think, which says that, well, we're going to try to remedy this particular kind of cheating. And so if a person is poor and can show that he can trace the poor back to a particular kind of cheating that took place, not against him, but against his ancestors, then he has a claim on the chips of somebody else if we can trace the fact that they have chips back to the fact that his ancestors cheated. That's just not going to work. I mean, what difference does it make? You have one poor kid who, all right, he can trace his poverty back to slavery through some, he brings in a bunch of genealogists and everything. You have another poor black kid who can't trace it back to slavery. It's because his parents made, bad life choices. You have a Hispanic kid who is poor because his parents recently came over, from a third world country. You have an Asian kid who's poor for the same reason. You have an Appalachian kid who's poor because his parents are both alcoholics. They're all poor. What difference does it make to say that we're going to have social programs for one because their poverty can be traced to one source, and those social programs are not going to be available to the other kids? I mean, they're all poor. They could all benefit.
I don't want to interrupt you,
let me do
but
this.
You're missing the point. That's not the point that I'm making. You're reading more into it. You're reading yourself into it.
Let's do this. We've got